If you think that reading is bad, try getting up in a pulpit and having a Dominican in the third row. And a Paulist over there too. I mean, what's happening here? So what do? I resort to one of my own. The credibility of the church and of the Christian message rests entirely on how Christians serve those marginalized by society. I'll say that again. The credibility of the church and of the Christian message rests entirely on how Christians serve those marginalized by society. Pope Francis, in a homily to new cardinals 3 years ago. He went on to insist that new cardinals always remember to serve Jesus crucified in every person who is marginalized, to see the Lord present even in those who have lost their faith, or those who have turned away from the practice of their faith, or who have declared themselves to be atheists. The Pope insisted that we will not find the Lord unless we truly accept the marginalized. Like Jesus, we need to be compassionate, to seek to reintegrate the marginalized, to respond immediately to those left most in need by society. But the Pope is not necessarily talking about grand schemes or comprehensive plans. He's talking about simply serving, directly serving those who are most in need. Because that is what Jesus asked of his disciples. I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was ill, you cared for me. I was in prison, you visited me. Jesus was asking his disciples to be with people who are most in need. To be with those, as Greg Boyle said in his Burke lecture a few weeks ago, who are at the margins. Remember that in the Old Testament, the Jewish people were asked to pay special attention to widows, orphans, strangers, and resident aliens who lived among them. Precisely because these people were the most vulnerable, they were those who were most in need. And now Jesus is asking his disciples to do the same. But he is taking it one step farther. He's talking about the hungry and the thirsty, strangers, those who are naked, the sick, the imprisoned, the people society often take for granted, people on the margins. These are the people we walk by every day and ignore. These are the people we see on TV and vilify. These are the modern boogeymen that politicians will trot out when it's convenient. Just listen to the national news. Those who are most in need are sometimes those who are most scorned, most reviled. And it's so much easier to insult them than to actually do something about it. And I'm not talking about some grand program or debating national health care or food stamps or tax cuts. I'm simply pointing out that regardless of what our political and ideological affiliation is, there are people with real needs and people whose needs are immediate. The hungry cannot wait for government programs. They need to be fed. The naked need to be clothed, or they will die of exposure to the elements. The sick need medicine, and they need it now. There are people in our society who are in desperate need, and we, the disciples of Jesus, we are called to help. The holiday season is upon us. I'm sure some of you rushed over on Black Friday and fell in line at the nearest Walmart and rushed in. But in a very ironic sense, this most joyful of times is also the loneliest of times for many people. For many elderly or sick or imprisoned people, the holiday season is a reminder of what they do not have, what they did have, a reminder of better times. It's also the time when people seem to be most generous. Whether it is going down to a soup kitchen to help serve Thanksgiving dinner, to the homeless, or preparing Advent baskets for the poor, many people realize that this is a time to give back, a time to share their blessings. And that is a good thing, and we give thanks to God for that. Yes, we are asked to take care of other people just as God takes care of us. The first reading points out the shepherding care of God. I will rescue them, God says, from every place where they are scattered, when it was cloudy and dark. I myself will pasture my sheep. I myself will give them rest. And again, the lost I will seek out. The strayed I will bring back. The injured I will bind up. The sick I will heal. There's a special concern that God has for those who are most in need, for those who are at the margins. And we are asked to duplicate that concern. Just as God takes care of us, so should we take care of each other and of all creation. As I said earlier, today is the feast of Christ the King. It's the end of the church year. At first glance over these readings, Christ the King seems to be about judgment. I think it's more about right living. Ours is a God who loves us so much that he wants us, that he demands of us that we care for all of his creation. This is a God who loves us so much, he wants us to care for each other, to pay special attention to those who need it more, simply because that is exactly what God himself would do. We are called, brothers and sisters, to remember that we are the compassion of God, that we are the face of God to those who are most in need. The good news is that we can do something about it. We can do something about it in the here and now. Stop by the Interfaith Shelter that we're hosting. Say hello to our guests. Join the group that goes down to St. Vincent de Paul and serve a meal. Correspond with inmates in prison. There's a million other things you can do. But whatever it is that we choose to do, the important thing is that we do something. I began by quoting Pope Francis, so I'll end by quoting him again. The way of the church, he says, is not condemning anyone eternally, but to pour out the balm of mercy on all those who ask for it with a sincere heart. The way of the church is precisely to leave her four walls behind and to go out in search of those who are distant, those who are on the outskirts of life. In a word, he says, charity cannot be neutral. Charity cannot be indifferent. Charity cannot be lukewarm. Charity cannot be impartial. Charity is infectious. It excites, it risks, it engages. For true charity is always unmerited, unconditional, and gratuitous. Like a good Jesuit, the Pope is insisting on what St. Ignatius of Loyola always emphasized, that love is truly shown more in deeds than in words. And that's a great thing to remember as we come to the conclusion of this liturgical year.